I want to welcome everyone to our virtual town hall as part of the North Carolina Trusted Elections Tour. Thank you all for joining. We're going to be starting our webinar in just a minute. But while we're waiting, I want to thank some of the co-sponsors for tonight's town hall. You can see their logos there. This is a collaborative effort, and we want to make sure that all the folks helping us get the right information out about our North Carolina elections are part of this and are thanked. So we have the League of Women Voters North Carolina, who do a great job getting information out to voters. We have the North Carolina Network for Fair, Safe, and Secure Elections, which is a program of the Carter Center. Bob Orr and myself, Jennifer Roberts, are the co-leads for the Carter Center's work in North Carolina. We have Veterans for All Voters that work with veterans to ensure that they are engaged and active in voting when they return home. They also have information for active duty. They can vote. Active duty military can vote overseas through the portal and through absentee ballots. And of course, we also have the Reimagining America Project, which has a voting rights committee, and they are working to help raise awareness about racial issues around everything from housing to education, healthcare, and voting rights. And Erin Mills, who is with the Reimagining America Project, is our technician tonight. So I want to give a big shout out and thanks to her for running the Zoom tonight and making sure that our sound is working and that everyone can hear us well. So I don't know if Bob Orr has been able to join us yet. My co-lead in this work for the Carter Center is Bob Orr, who is a former North Carolina Supreme Court justice. He has been in Western North Carolina today and is on the road and maybe joining us by phone. But when he is able to join us, we'll make sure that he can say hello. What he usually says in these town halls is that this is going to be the 60th time in our nation's history that we are voting for president of the United States. We have come a long way in North Carolina. Our elections are more safe and secure every year, it seems. And we want to continue to support our election workers. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Roberts, former mayor of Charlotte, former Mecklenburg County Commission chair. This is our 23rd town hall this year. And we are so appreciative of all the election experts who have helped explain how our North Carolina elections work and the changes in election laws that voters will need to know about. In 2022, we went to 14 counties. This year, we have visited 22 counties from the west to the east, large and small, and we've been very impressed by the professional and bipartisan nature of our dedicated election staff and boards. Bob Orr and I have been the co-leads in the past 3 years for the Carter Center's work in North Carolina, supporting democracy and safe and secure elections and the peaceful transfer of power. The Carter Center was founded by former President Jimmy Carter, who recently turned 100 years old, and First Lady Rosalind Carter in 1982. The center is known for decades of work overseas supporting democracy and monitoring free and secure elections. And they began to focus on supporting American democracy in 2020, when it was clear that trust in many of our democratic institutions was eroding. So the Trusted Elections town halls are just one aspect of our outreach to support democracy. We also have been engaged with coordinating a commission on the future of North Carolina elections, the North Carolina Faith and Democracy Initiative, and numerous other engagements and events focused on democracy and peaceful elections. So Bob Orr says he's getting on in 5 minutes. While he's getting on, I'm going to introduce our panel all at once. We're going to have them all on the Zoom at the same time because many times the questions about elections can be answered by a couple of different, from a couple of different perspectives. So first of all, we have Karen Brinson Bell, who is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Board of Elections. Karen Brinson Bell became executive director in 2019. This is the state agency charged with administering elections and overseeing all 100 county boards of elections, as well as campaign finance compliance. In her time as executive director, Karen has overseen more than 10 elections, including the 2020 presidential election, which was the largest in North Carolina's history. She has spent most of her career in elections administration. From 2011 to 2015, she was the director for the Transylvania County Board of Elections. Prior to that, she worked for 5 years as a district elections technician for the State Board of Elections, supporting 12 county boards in Western North Carolina in all aspects of elections. And before that, she was the deputy director of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. So welcome to Karen. Next, we have David Hood, who is a Republican member of the Catawba County Board of Elections and a partner in the law firm Patrick, Harper, and Dixon. In 2021, he received the Government of Catawba County Distinguished Public Service Award, bestowed by the Board of Commissioners of Catawba County. He has served Catawba as a member of the Board of Elections for the past more than 20 years and actually served as chair of the board for 7 of them. Has Skip Saunders joined us yet? Yes, he has. Next, we have Skip Saunders, who is a Democrat and a board of election member for Dare County and also the chair of that board. He's been a Dare County resident since 1975. He raises children there and lives with his wife in Kitty Hawk. He was a residential general contractor for 35 years and a public high school teacher for 10 years. He is now retired, except for the Board of Elections work, and a charter member of the Outer Banks Home Builders Association and Dare County Habitat for Humanity. He also served on the Dare County Board of Education for 8 years and has been on the Board of Elections for a little over 3 years. And we have Kelly Tourneau, who is the Associate General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer for Western Carolina University. She served as the Associate Counsel for the North Carolina State Board of Elections from 2019 to 2021, was the Director of North Carolina Policy for the Center for Responsible Lending from 2016 to 2019, and before that worked as the North Carolina General Assembly as a staff attorney and legislative analyst for 8 years. Finally, we have Tori Crass, who is with the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. He is the Chief Risk Officer for the state of North Carolina. In this role, he focuses on increasing the cyber maturity of the state, strengthening the Department of Information Technology's approach to cybersecurity with local, state, and federal partners. And before this, he served as the Chief Information Security Officer for the North Carolina State Board of Elections for nearly 4 years through a contract with Woodstar Labs. In that role, he oversaw implementation of the Board of Elections security roadmap and provided operational guidance for its security program. So he can speak to election cybersecurity for sure. I also want to take just 1 minute, which I forgot to do at the beginning, and say that our hearts and thoughts and prayers are with all of Western North Carolina. This has been an unprecedented year for hurricane damage in the western part of our state. We're going to talk about that in a minute and how it relates to elections, but I just want to say that we are so appreciative of all our first responders, of all the efforts across our state from so many different organizations and people, really literally from the coast to the mountains, helping our mountain counties recover. So many, many thanks to all of you engaged with that. All right. Looks like Bob has not joined us yet, so I'm going to launch into our questions for the evening. Starting with Karen Brinson Bell. As I just mentioned, many of North Carolinians' minds are on our neighbors in Western North Carolina. And I wonder if I know you've been dealing with a lot of press conferences about how those counties are working to make sure voters do have access to the ballot. Can you give us a summary of some of the changes that have occurred that are going to help voters access both early voting and the ballot on the day of elections?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me and putting these town halls together. It's important that people understand how we conduct elections in North Carolina, and I hope that we can further that understanding tonight. Um, you know, we have been, it's certainly more than getting the word out through media that we've needed to do in order to be responsive to the affected counties in Western North Carolina. Um, as you mentioned, my initial elections career as a district election technician starting in 2006, and then being a county elections director in Transylvania County means that this is very much my adopted home in Western North Carolina. And I know these folks, and I know their tenacity, their determination, and their resiliency to ensure that their citizens and voters of their counties are able to cast their ballot. And that's the same commitment that we have at the State Board of Elections. It is, when that first Monday after Helene hit on September 30th, we had a state board meeting to exercise emergency authority at that point for a natural disaster to allow the affected counties to postpone their absentee board meetings. All counties hold those starting 5 weeks out from election day. So that's where we were on the eve of that first absentee board meeting. And so they exercised that authority. That was also at that meeting that I was reporting to the state board members that 14 of our county board offices could not open. We knew that the buildings were intact and that no equipment or ballots or anything had been damaged, which was a significant relief. But we also needed to still be in contact with some of those staff members who, are just still committed to this day, but they were dealing with their own personal safety and how to respond in that devastation. But, remarkably, they came in, they have been working without power, without water at times, without internet connectivity, and were able to get all their county offices open within 1 week. They were open to the public. And now we're on the, we're almost to Thursday's start of early voting. And I can proudly say that all 100 county board of elections will open early voting on Thursday morning. And in those affected counties, the 25 designated through state law, we will have 76 sites open when 80 were planned. It's just remarkable. And I think a real testament is to the fact that we had working partnerships with state emergency management, with state DIT, with the National Guard, with so many, so that we could quickly respond, and we knew how to operate with them, and they understood elections, and it has really boosted our response. But I think also important to everyone to know is that the State Board of Elections worked in a bipartisan manner, unanimously passed two resolutions actually to be responsive to those counties. And then the legislature came in unanimously, bipartisanly passed. That legislation codified much of what we had put into the resolution, made it effective for 25 counties, and then that was signed into law by the governor. And so what we're able to do is give flexibility to those affected counties to adjust polling places, to adjust early voting, to meet the needs. I mean, we had a lot of facilities that needed to have special provisions in order to get open. We're still assessing or meeting those needs for election day, which may require generators and porta potties. We do have power to all the early voting sites, which is remarkable, but we're certainly having to put porta potties and things like that into place and create internet connectivity. But for the voters, we also were able to give provisions where they can go into the county office right now, even before early voting, and cast their ballot at the county board office through the absentee by mail procedures. We'll have them complete a request form. We'll issue them the ballot, and they can turn it back in just like they would an absentee ballot. They can also, if they're a voter of that affected county, they can request an absentee ballot. And if they need to deliver that to another county because of access or convenience, they can do that. It's been remarkable how the Postal Service has been able to stand up their operations, and we do have mail coming and going from all county boards of elections. And so voters can still return their ballot that way. But they're going to find early voting available in their counties, and they're going to find election day sites. I don't have an exact count at this point on election day sites, but the voters will find that the vast majority of their sites will be open. So I hope that that's what you were getting at, Jennifer. I can obviously talk a long time about what we've had to do to respond to this situation, but everyone should know that not just in these counties, but in every county in North Carolina, we are going to do everything within our power to ensure that every eligible voter can cast their ballot.
Thanks, Karen. No, that is just tremendous work and coordination and collaboration. And what are the you mentioned that if people are living in other counties because their homes were destroyed, the other boards of election and counties are going to have some different things they have to do. And how are other counties going to be impacted?
Yeah, for the most part, what's been set up is that an affected voter can bring their absentee by mail ballot or have a near relative or their legal guardian deliver their absentee by mail ballot to any county board of elections in North Carolina or any early voting site in North Carolina. We'll be taking possession of those, logging that, doing a chain of custody, and delivering those to the issuing or home county of that voter. And that'll take place all the way up until 7:30 p.m. on election day when absentee ballots are due for any voter. But those are that's really what's in place for the other county boards of elections to be of service to the voters. Now, they do not have the ballots for all counties. So the request for a ballot will still need to be with the county board of elections where that voter is registered. But if they're one of the affected counties, they can deliver it to another county board of elections or another county's early voting site, as long as they do so by 7:30 p.m. election day.
Now that's super. I want to remind our listeners that the Q&A feature is open. So if you have a question for one of our panelists, feel free to ask that question, and we'll try to get it worked in. Although I have a whole bunch of questions that these folks are going to answer, but I just want to continue on thinking about the voter ID requirement. This is a new part of what we're doing in North Carolina, and of course, people have lost their IDs in the storm, and just wondered if you could, Karen, briefly just say how's it going so far before the storm, and then what are the accommodations for people after the hurricane?
Certainly. And after we go through the questions that I'm going to answer, I'll put some links in the Q&A so that people can have access to the pages that have been set up for these things. So for the folks dealing with the Helene disaster, we have a special web page, ncsbe.gov/Helene, for all North Carolinians and others that need to know information about our photo ID. We have a special campaign and special website designed for that, which is bringitinc.gov. So BRINGITNC.gov. And I'll put that into the link. And then always there is a wealth of information on our state board website, which is simply ncsbe.gov. In terms of voter ID, we obviously had a lot of stops and starts in North Carolina as we went through legislation and litigation and so forth, but we were able to go forward in the fall of 2023 with municipal elections. We also had it in effect for the primary and second primary that took place this year. And now we are implementing for our largest election yet, and with photo ID for North Carolina. Most voters will present their driver's license, which is one of the many acceptable forms of photo ID. But if they don't have a driver's license, there's other permitted IDs, such as tribal IDs, veteran IDs, passport. There's many public and private university IDs that are accepted, and community college and public government employee IDs that are acceptable. And so all of that can be found on our website. We also have provisions that if someone had a valid driver's license when they were 65 years of age, but now are older and it's no longer valid, as long as it was valid when they were 65, they can still show that ID. Folks can get a free voter ID at the County Board of Elections, and it's only good for voting purposes, but it will ensure that we've checked you in the voter registration system and will issue that ID and take your photo for that purpose. And then last but not least, state law also allowed for an exception form. And so we have implemented that provision of the law, which indicates there are 3 reasonable impediments. It could be for religious objection. It could be, there's a whole list of exceptions that someone was not able to obtain an ID. That can include transportation. It could be for conflict with work, various things, or they might have an issue with natural disaster. And so we had not had that in effect, but certainly that will be a possibility for voters. And, you know, I will stress that photo ID is required whether you're voting in person or absentee by mail. And so that exception form is mailed to voters. And if they cannot provide a photocopy of their ID, if they're voting by mail, they can use that exception form to indicate that they cannot provide a copy of one of the acceptable forms of ID, or they can list one of the other reasons that they could not obtain an ID. Similarly, if someone presents to vote in person, if they have an ID but they don't have it with them, they can indicate that and they can bring it to the County Board of Elections before we certify the election, and they will vote provisionally. Or if they need to use the exception form, they can list the reason and include that exception form with their provisional ballot. And we will work through that during the certification period.
We're going to talk about provisional ballots in a minute because I know the Board of Election members have some say in the provisional ballots. But I want to pull in David and Skip real quick from Catawba and Dare County about the voter ID because you all have been through at least one. David's been through many elections, but this is the first presidential with voter ID in a while. They also need to include a photocopy in their absentee ballots. I know that you all have started looking at some of those. How's it going?
Going well in Catawba. I was actually looking at them this morning in the election meeting we had this morning. And we had obviously a great number of IDs in there. We checked them to make sure that the proper form was in there, and we matched the name to the voter. In addition to that, we looked at the exception forms, and their last couple of elections where we've used this process, we've had exception forms. And I didn't do any scientific study of this, but for the most part, the exception forms had to do with health or disability issues. A lot of the folks that will say they don't have photo ID and have to use the exception form are people that are in a facility, people that are perhaps at home but can't get out and haven't been out in a long time. Those are the most common exception forms. I guess now we are going to see in certain of our western neighbor counties folks who have lost their IDs tragically. But from my experience, the ID requirement has been going pretty well.
And Skip, you're on mute. Skip, you need to unmute.
Finally, I can talk without a Democrat interrupting me. That's great.
I think you're still on mute, Skip.
Look at that little microphone thing at the bottom
Yeah.
left. Push that.
Okay, you can't unmute him, can you, Aaron? No, he has to unmute himself. Yep, there's a microphone at the bottom left. There you go. Nope. All right. Well, Skip's going to take a minute. Skip, when you're able to get that to work, do you have a teenager at home?
Yeah, this is what Generation Z is for, is to have them around for this purpose.
Exactly.
But I will say that also the process that we've been using for voter ID and checking that and all that has not been controversial on any kind of partisan basis, at least not in my county. It's really been going well.
No, that's good to hear. And it's great to hear that people who lost their IDs can fill out that exception form. And they need to put, if they're absentee ballots, need to put it in that outside clear envelope. Is that right?
That's exactly where it goes.
Super. Skip, I think you can talk now.
All righty. I don't have any video. I don't have a video image of you all, but can you hear me now?
Absolutely, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. And I agree with most of what David just said, except the part about interrupting. But anyway, no, we've had the same experience, David, that you've had, and we really haven't had any problem that I'm aware of. The voter ID exception forms have been working well. Everybody seems to understand it. I know our director has a couple of questions that she needs guidance on after our session today, but that's about it. You know, I mean, we're in pretty good shape as far as that goes.
That's great to hear. Thanks. Another topic that people have a lot of questions about is the list maintenance. And I know that, gosh, Tori and Kelly may have something to add to this as well. But there have, as we know, people move, they pass away, and the lists have to be updated for the voter rolls. And there have been reports about, 700,000 people being taken off. So I'd just love to hear maybe first from Karen, kind of what the normal procedures are, and then if Kelly or Tori want to add into that. Karen?
So what this highlights is what we call list maintenance. There's often references to purging voters from the voter rolls, and that's just not an accurate word. We do list maintenance, and there are various status for the voters in our system. Someone can be active, they can be inactive, or they can be removed. And so, but we always have a record of these transactions. We have a record of their voter history. We have a record of their voter registration. We have a record of the correspondence with them. And so what the press release was indicating, we had a lot of questions because of actions in other states or a lack of understanding of what these processes are. List maintenance, there's a number of things that we do, and there's a document on the state board website that is 39 pages long. So that's how thorough and methodical we are in what we do to maintain our voter rolls. There's the biannual list maintenance process. So following every federal election in the odd numbered years, we go through and we determine whether we've had contact with a voter through voting or through official correspondence. If we have not, after 2 federal elections, they will go from active to inactive status. And following 2 more federal elections, it goes from inactive to removed if we have not seen them participate in an election or have communication. That is, one of the largest efforts to maintain our voter rolls. But it also ensures that we don't disenfranchise voters who don't choose to participate in every election. We also have ongoing efforts through notifications that we get through the Department of Adult Corrections pertaining to felons and removal of those individuals to removed status. We also have information that comes from the Vital Records Department with the state because North Carolina law does not allow us to remove individuals based upon hearsay, obituaries, anything like that. It comes from the official records of the Vital Records Department, the death certificates. So that's another really key thing. We can get a notice from a near relative to remove someone for death reasons as well. We have, matching efforts and criteria where we're looking for duplicate voters. We receive information so that we can do mailings for the national change of address. It's just, so to see that number represents the accumulation over 23 months of work that we have done across the state to keep our rolls accurate. And, I'll also point out that, even voter registration is an effort that helps us to keep our records updated. And so as we see a rise in interest because of a presidential election, we're seeing that we now have over 7.7 million registered voters. And that's just because, one, North Carolina is growing, but two, it's a presidential year. And so we have people who are interested in wanting to be active in the process. And so we are updating our voter registration rolls on a daily basis as people register to vote. Of course, that deadline ended October the 11th, and we now will offer same-day registration. But this is a multi-pronged, very thorough effort to ensure that we are systematic in what we do, very methodical. We're adhering to the National Voter Registration Act, which dates back all the way to 1993. It also puts in a window where we don't remove people in that 90 days leading up to an election without it being something like a felony conviction or a notice from the voter in their change of voter registration. So there's some limitations, but this ensures consistency and that we're not disenfranchising anyone.
If I could just make one quick comment, because something came up in our meeting this morning in Catawba County. We have a voter who unfortunately has passed away since she sent in her absentee ballot, which we had already accepted. So there's a process for challenging that and having a hearing at the canvas, just as a way to point out that Karen's procedure she just talked about continues on through the election, where we are paying attention to the information we get from the state agencies, for example, about a death, and making sure that that record is correct and that someone can't vote, under those circumstances. So it's a process that I think is well designed to work even up to the election.
Thank you for that. Yes.
No, that's a great example. And the fact that we have 7.7 million voters, the figure of 700,000 over 2 years, when people, we have 150 people a day moving into Charlotte. So I can see how those numbers add up. And Tori, is there any way for somebody to hack into the voter rolls and create fake people?
So I would hope not. When we start looking at the controls that are in place around, what Karen had just really explained in terms of that list maintenance activity and things like that. That's one part of it. So in the event that there was some anomaly that is popping up in that space, the folks who are doing that list maintenance, those things would come to light through those audit processes. The other thing is, from a Board of Elections standpoint, in a security posture sort of way, this isn't a situation where there aren't protections in place around those systems, to take it at that level for a moment. So we're running best in class cybersecurity protections across the environment. So you've got endpoint protection and firewall and logs being collected and reviewed on a regular basis. You've got access control lists to make sure that appropriate systems can talk to appropriate systems and other systems can't. You've got multi-factor authentication that plays into some of these controls that are in place for Board of Elections systems, as well as a number of other things on top of the actual audit processes that are involved in this space. So while at a system level, systems do have vulnerabilities, we don't want to say that they don't. The thing that makes the difference is those controls that are put in place around those systems to both protect those systems as well as to detect in the event that anything anomalous is happening, that allows us to then go in and actually investigate that and determine what that is. And especially even now, the posture and the visibility that we have around election from the state level to Board of Elections and beyond is heightened. Like, we're already watching things more closely than we would on a day-to-day basis, just because we know that this is an important activity. There's a heightened risk because there's heightened awareness. So as that awareness goes up, we're already doing extra things, having more people looking at logs and looking at different systems to make sure there's no anomalous activities going on. And in the event that we see anything we don't understand, and that's really what we've been seeing, is we might see something that the person looking at that event, they don't understand what that is. The next process is to go through and actually investigate that and figure out exactly what that is. And thankfully, in every single case we've had so far, those have been IT isms, so to coin a phrase, where it's something in the scope of IT that somebody didn't understand how a system talks with the system or whatnot. And then we get to the bottom of it. We do the research, we look at the technology behind it, and get to a point where we can effectively explain what happened. And so at the end of the day, if there was anything odd going on, we would certainly know that.
Thanks, Tori. And we'll get into more of the system security in a little bit. But I want to go back to the voter rolls, because there's also there's been a challenge, and this may be in Kelly's bailiwick. There's been a challenge to 225,000 registered voters, and I know it's still out there, but can you give us a quick update on that challenge and where it stands and what was the reason behind it?
So Karen can speak more to the current situation on it. You know, I no longer represent the State Board of Elections, but I know that that a hearing is scheduled this week on this case. It is now in federal court, and the issue is really about whether so the Help America Vote Act, some issues surrounding that, and the RNC has challenged North Carolina's process of registering voters, saying that that the Help America Vote Act requires either a driver's license number or a social security number to register, and therefore anyone who did not have that should be purged from the voter rolls. The State Board of Elections has made a very compelling argument that there are other both federal laws at play, the National Voter Registration Act, other principles, and really explained why they believe that that case has no merit. I'll let Karen go at it from there, but that's really the basis, is kind of an interpretation of the Help America Vote Act.
You know, Kelly's role has changed when she's no longer the Associate General Counsel telling me that I can't speak to a lawsuit that's in play. But she's represented it very well, and I can speak to it to some degree because, you know, one, it's a challenge saying that there's about 225,000 individuals on our rolls who did not get checked through DMV and our Social Security system for validation of their the last four of their social or their driver's license. And that number that's actually not a solid number. We may have actually checked those people in the system and, you know, not gotten an exact match, which is required by the Social Security Administration. We see issues with hyphenation, with accent marks or apostrophes separating someone's last name who might be, say, O'Brien. And if that's not entered in exactly the way that Social Security has it, then it doesn't mean that that person isn't a real live human being who's eligible to vote. It just means that we may not have an exact match. And so there are a variety of reasons that someone might not present that as well. But that doesn't prohibit us from going through the processes of the Help America Vote Act, which requires when they do present themselves to vote for the first time after registering and not having that point of validation, that they have to present a driver's license or a government document or utility bill or something of that nature. There's very specific items that we can accept that provide their residence address. Also remember that when we send verification cards for a voter who's registering to vote, if it's returned undeliverable, we have to go through another process to determine why that was not delivered by the Postal Service. But delivery is part of the verification process, and it's in saying that the Postal Service recognizes this address and that that individual is at that address. Remember also that just because if we do have a situation where someone is ineligible on the roll, that doesn't equal voter fraud. When they present themselves to vote, they're going to have to state their name and address for any election, And now they're going to have to present photo ID. Furthermore, if they're requesting an absentee ballot, we have to have the driver's license or the last four of their social in order to process that request and issue them a ballot. So, I think what we have to be very mindful of with this lawsuit or with any of the questions that are around our processes for verifying voters is that we have a lot of checks and balances in place, and that we have to be very mindful also to not disenfranchise a voter because of, issues between systems being able to talk to each other. And so I think that's what's really key, is recognizing what the Help America Vote Act has put in place as protections for the voters, but also systems in place to help us through the verification process.
Thanks for that update. And one of the things that our system allows, because there is human error, and if you are Ann with an E and someone didn't type that in and you show up and it's just Ann with no E and they're like, well, I don't know. This is why I always tell people to vote early. Because if there's something that doesn't match, they can fill out a provisional ballot. And that's why I want to talk to get our Board of Election members back on and talk about adjudicating provisional ballots. Like what, besides something doesn't match up, so you're not in the voter rolls the way that you think you should be with your name, et cetera, and address, you can vote a provisional ballot. And then where do those go, and how does the board look through those over and make sure that they're correct? David and Skip, whoever wants to go first.
Well, I from the experience that I have, the ballots come into our office, and of course we've delegated the handling of those ballots from our board, to our staff. And I believe there's I think there's a limitation on the amount of time that they have to react to those ballots to research why they're provisional. And our staff has done a terrific job of that. And when the ballots come back around for our review, staff has already batched them based on whether they would recommend disapproval for any reason that they weren't able to do the background research to figure out why they were provisional, whether it was a residency problem that they couldn't provide evidence on, or identification or something like that. So that research is already done by the time it gets to us, and then we see the result of that and we make a judgment. The way they organize those provisional ballots as they come to us really helps us be expedient about that process when we review them. So, David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And the meeting that we hold to pass on those on those provisional ballots, one way or the other, is an open meeting. People can come to that meeting and watch and see how we do it and what the results are. You can also keep up with, if you're the provisional voter yourself, you can keep up with whether your provisional vote has been counted or has been accepted, I guess, online. So there's various ways to keep up with this. Provisional ballots, that is not a new concept. It's something that we've been doing for a very long time. And again, it works pretty well. For the most part, you are talking about ballots. Again, I haven't looked at the exact statistics on this, but having done this a few elections, mostly you are talking about people who have moved. They're not on the right list, or they've gone to the wrong precinct from where they're supposed to be, that sort of thing. Those are the ones that are almost certainly going to count. There are people that show up and just literally think they can vote even though they're not registered. And it does happen. People that we had one time, the guy had a business in Catawba County. He said, I know I'm registered in a neighboring county, but I want to vote here because this is what I care about. I say, well, thank you for your support, but you need to go back to County B and vote there. But the provisional process really works pretty well.
We heard one person say that there were truck drivers who were driving down 85 and stopped and tried to vote because, they live in New Jersey, but they forgot to vote and they wanted to vote for president. And instead of having them get all upset, they were offered a provisional ballot.
We've had that happen in Catawba before because we have I-40 and we have some people who stop in. I don't think I can make it back to Tennessee in time. It's like, well, he possibly should have thought of that before 6 o'clock on election night.
Yeah, and David brought up mentioned something right at the beginning of what he had to say that I think is real important to remind voters is that when we review provisional ballots or when we do a hand count on a sample ballot audit or anything that we do, anything, there's a bipartisan team that is looking at it together. And that to me is one of the most unifying aspects of every step of the election that I've seen in my short tenure on our board. And having come in with virtually no election background myself, other than as a voter, this has been one of the most impressive things that I've seen that should help ensure anyone who's voting that their vote is going to be counted, and they can not worry about partisanship getting in the way of any aspect of it. I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, I've always said I do not know exactly how elections run in other states, and I'm no expert in that. But I'll tell you that in North Carolina, if anything important is happening during the electoral process, there is an R and a D next to
Yes.
everything that's happening, and that should be very reassuring to anyone of any political stripe that that's how this works. That there is no one party or the other party or anybody else trying to pull the wool over somebody else's eyes. It can't be done. I mean, I can't pull the wool over, my fella, and I wouldn't try anyway. But we've got one R, one D doing most things,
Yes.
and it really does help. One thing, if you don't know about our multi-party assistant teams, multi-partisan assistance teams, we call them MAT teams. We have a team of people who go out and help people vote, help people do things, help people do absentee stuff when requested. Typically, people in an assisted living facility. We have an R and a D that go as a team, and it really is a reassuring thing to know how bipartisan we really are in an age in which it feels so partisan.
Yeah, it's been almost therapeutic to be a part of our board especially at this time, and to do something together for the good of the country like we've been doing. It's been amazing for me personally. Really something. Really something.
I'll stop talking in a minute, possibly, but I've been doing this since 1998. I could probably count on one hand the number of times we have disagreed on a partisan basis as a board. I mean, it just doesn't happen, at least in my county, very often.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, David, how many times you did not agree with the Democratic board members, and I was going to tell the story. When we were in Halifax County, we asked one of the board members, how often have you ever not agreed or had a unanimous vote? And she said, well, back in 2014, there was one vote.
I remember one vote in particular. I don't remember what it was about, but it was something we had honest disagreement about. And this was one of the years when I was the sole Republican. It was the two Democrats. The disagreement was between me and one of the Democrats versus the other Democrat. It wasn't even partisan. It was just a totally good faith disagreement about something. And it wasn't even done on a partisan basis.
Well, I know that that's very comforting for our audience to hear. And it's something that we really need to support, much as we've seen the efforts in Western North Carolina. Those first responders don't ask if you're a Democrat or Republican. They just bring you food and water. And that is, that is what makes North Carolina so great. So appreciate our board members pointing that out and emphasizing that. I had a question come in about how, because there's so many rumors, there's misinformation out there, and there's worries about voters being challenged and the process being challenged. What can regular folks do, voters, citizens, to help make this process peaceful and smooth, and to try to get ahead of that misinformation? And anybody can answer that one.
Misinformation wise, I've been doing my own work there, but using the fact sheets, if you will, that the state board has supplied on their website, which anybody can pick up. And what I've been doing is picking them up one at a time. There are 11 of them, and one of the things that they cover is misinformation and disinformation. So if a person goes to NCSBE or .gov and goes to about elections, you'll end up on a page that has these fact sheets. And I've been pulling the fact sheets up and sending them over to social media to my circle of friends. And I've got some really good feedback from that. There's some powerful stuff there about misinformation, disinformation, and verifying, corroborating sources, and things like that that feed into the confusion and the tension that we're all experiencing right now. So I find that there's a wealth of resources there. Besides that, there's one on cybersecurity. There's some on just election security. 10 facts about why your absentee ballot is safe, and so on and so forth. And so the first thing I would say to anyone is that's a really concise, succinct place to go to learn how to refute that type of chatter and chaos in your life. So there's that.
Tor, I think he's paying you a compliment for all that your your team did when you were working on the Board of Elections, and Karen trying to keep it updated.
Yeah, it's valuable.
I'll speak to that. I mean, in 2019, when I came in as state elections director, we recognized that because a new election had been called in the 9th Congressional District after concerns around ballot harvesting that had taken place, and we needed to tell our story. We also had concerns about Russian involvement in the election in 2016, and we had been designated as critical infrastructure. So yes, Tori, Kelly, our state and federal and local partners were part of that effort to launch our voter confidence campaign and to create more transparency. That's when we revamped our state board website for security reasons, but also to be more user-friendly and to provide more information and more data. North Carolina has more data available on its state board website than any other state election office in the country. We're very proud of that. I don't say that to knock down our other states. It's just by our state laws, we have a lot of leeway to provide a strong level or a lot of data to our citizens, which helps in our checks and balances as well. We launched with the voter confidence campaign. Not only did we revamp the website, we launched our efforts on social media, which includes Mythbuster Mondays, so that we can tell the facts about elections and try to negate some of this false narrative that's out there about what we do. We also recognize, in our social media, you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn, and just find out not just Mythbuster Monday, but Security Saturday and things that we have themed so that we can tell our stories and help people understand the many layers that are in place to secure our election, to ensure that voters can cast their ballots so that they know that it is accurately done. And we want them to understand the differences between North Carolina and other states. We don't have one overarching federal law around election. Each state has their processes. There are federal laws that are uniform across the states, but then there's, certainly each state has their own federal or state laws around elections. So it's different when it comes to some states have all mail balloting. We have absentee by mail balloting. We don't require an excuse for why you want a mail ballot, but some states do. Some states elect their election official. I'm an appointed election official, and the county staff are hired individuals who work for a board. Not every state has a board. So there's a lot of different things that we want to make sure people understand how we conduct elections in North Carolina. And so, and we do it with the hashtag #YourVoteCountsNC. And also, there's a question. I've tried to address some of the questions that are coming in on the Q&A because y'all are setting me up with the questions that even Jennifer's asking. But there was a question about the multipartisan and the bipartisan terms. The legislation around the multipartisan assistance teams was just that. And we've been able to expand their capacity in these Helene affected counties. But as Board Member Hood mentioned, they were set up to assist in care facilities because workers at care facilities cannot be witnesses for absentee ballots. That has to be, and not always are family members available to come to those care facilities to help their loved ones. And so that's why those are put in place. It's multi-partisan because it does allow that we can, assign a libertarian or a Green Party person who's registered to vote, who's willing to serve. But the key is to make sure that it's not one single party administering the election. And our boards are bipartisan because by state law, our board members are appointed based upon recommendations from the political parties, the two largest political parties in our state. And and currently that would be a Republican party or the Democrat Party. And those come to the state board for the 4 members, and then the chair comes from the governor, also based upon political party recommendations. And so that's just the makeup of our law. But I'll tell you one thing, when that may be how these folks are appointed, but when they come through that door, they check their hat and put on their nonpartisan hat. They take oaths to uphold the law for all voters, and the staff at the state board and at the county boards are upholding that oath and that commitment as well.
I think you all got a nice compliment.
Just to add to that, Jennifer, another way is to be an election worker. So that is a fantastic way, both personally and to show your community, that you believe in elections. One, that you're someone they can trust. You will gain a wonderful understanding of how the election works. And we, especially in smaller, tight-knit communities, we trust our neighbors, right? I don't know what political affiliation my neighbors are, but now they know that when they see me, they've seen me at the polls, they've seen me at our precinct, and they ask me questions, and it's great. We talk, we have really good conversations. And I think not only are you helping yourself gain a wonderful, in-depth understanding of how elections work firsthand, going back to the bipartisanship, even a curbside voter, they get a bipartisan team of election workers going out to the car to provide their ballot and bring it back. There are just so many ways that you can see people working together in your own community by being a poll worker. And then you also become an ambassador for others. They feel like they can trust you, they can ask you questions, they believe that you're going to give them the right answer, and then they're going to see you again at the polls. And it's just a great experience and a great way for people to gain confidence in elections.
And Jennifer, I'll
Great plug.
piggyback onto that if possible. And because I think the question in part asked about, this election being challenged. And to some degree, there's not much that the public can do other than to understand the processes that we have in place to ensure the accuracy. So we have pre-election testing before every election. That is open to the public. They can see us test every contest, every ballot style, every piece of equipment that's going to be deployed. The board oversees that process and authorizes who can do that testing. We have chain of custody procedures that, from the handoff from the elections office to those bipartisan officials that have taken an oath, have training, are working those voting sites in their communities. We have chain of custody as all of that's returned. We follow every election during the certification period with a sample hand-to-eye audit. We make those random selections the day after the election, and we do that on Facebook Live or streaming, whatever service we can set up so that people can see how those random selections are done. Those are sent out to the county. They have bipartisan teams who do a hand-to-eye count to ensure the accuracy of our tabulators. We have so many things in place that aid us in going before the county boards 10 days following the election to say to them, we are prepared to have you certify this election. And within their oath and within their charge in the law book, unless they have serious concerns over the conduct of that election, such that a new election should be called, then they are to certify. And when and similar process happens following the election. This time it'll be November the 26th when the state board meets to certify the election. And the results become official at that point. On election night, they're unofficial, but they become certified. We can issue certificates of nomination or certificates of election in this case, based upon that authentication that's occurred at this county board meeting 10 days following the election. So November 15th this year and November 26th for the state board to conduct that. Now, obviously, we could still have recounts. We could have protests that we may need to work through. But there's set laws around those situations as well. So it's a real testament to these people, Member Hood and Chair Saunders, getting involved and being a part of the process, and to all of those 25,000 or so folks who will be working at our voting sites across this state, and all of the dedicated officials who are working day in and day out for the accuracy and security of our elections in our county boards.
Absolutely. No, Kelly and Karen both, it's a great offer to tell people, if you are, worried about how elections run, sign up to be a poll worker, because we've heard from board members in other parts of the state that said, I was skeptical, and then I signed up and got trained and saw the process, and wow, I'm a believer. You also got a great compliment in the Q&A because someone said, I can see our state's doing a great job. Can you help out with Arizona and Georgia?
I get to interact with those state election directors, and because I'm the chief election official in North Carolina, I also interact with secretaries of state who are the chief election official in many other states. And here's what I want folks to know. We may not do it exactly the same, but the design in every state is for there to be checks and balances, for there to be procedures, for us to be methodical in how we do it. There are overarching federal laws that ensure that there's a lot of uniformity with the National Voter Registration Act, with the Help America Vote Act. And so, it may not look the same, but I will say that, I have confidence in what my colleagues are doing across this country to ensure that our elections go smoothly and that every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot. I'll also say, the commitment that these board members have shown, there's a lot of questions around whether we're going to be certifying this election. And what I can say is there are a few blips on the radar where some people did not choose to certify. And in two cases, two board members, just one case, but two board members were removed from the Surrey County Board of Elections for their unwillingness to certify the election. And so, but in the nearly every other case, nearly every single election, it is with bipartisan, unanimous support that our elections are certified. And I have complete confidence that with the procedures and the systems that we have in place that are established and long-serving to North Carolina, that these board members and the other board members in the other 98 counties will have confidence to certify this election as well.
Oh,
So yeah, David and Skip, you guys are going to be busy after November the 5th.
oh yeah. Well, we're busy. I'm busy now. Our board we're very busy. It's like a fire hose. David probably has it the same way. I mean, we're doing everything we can to make sure people feel confident about what's coming. I mean, everything I can think of. I barely made it to this meeting because we were finishing with our absentee ballot review, and I was over in Manio, about 45 minutes away. And I was really worried that I was going to have to say I'm not going to make it on time or whatever. But yeah, we're after it. We really are.
No, we appreciate that so much. I think one of the things to answer that question some more that the average person can do is to share the correct information. Don't spread misinformation. Share the right info. Make sure you're using the right website, and support election workers. Be really nice to them and thank them. And I know we always need more folks helping at the polls, and I know that has been an issue in some of our counties. Are there accommodations for people in the western counties in terms of poll workers, Karen?
Yes, some of the provisions within the resolution and then the Disaster Relief Act that allows for the affected counties to actually have voters from other counties in the state can volunteer and work in the affected counties. For those who are serving in the county already, we can move them about. They don't have to work in their precinct of residence. And so that gives us some flexibility. But what I will say, and I think this just speaks to the fabric of North Carolinians and the spirit in these counties, we have the poll workers that we need, is what I'm hearing from these various counties. And, you know, and it's because so many of our workers are long serving, and they are committed to this. And this is a way that, whether they are long serving or new to being a poll worker, they see it as a way to give back to their community. And it's also, you know, it's just, I just think it speaks volumes. And so, you know, that's another reality. The reality is, this is another security measure that's in place because it's the people of that community that are serving. And, you know, I hope that people, you know, will put down the phones and get away from the email and all these things that folks do, you know, where they can hide behind, you know, a screen, and start realizing that the insults and the vitriol and the hostility that they are throwing out there is directed at people that go to the same grocery stores, may sing in their church choir, may very well have been their English teacher or their basketball coach. And, you know, would you say that to their face? Do you really believe that your former English teacher is not going to fairly conduct an election? And, you know, and remember, you know, they are working together. We work together at the county boards. As the members said, there's always a D and an R in these critical processes. So know that, you know, some of this that's out there is completely false, and go to trusted sources of information and stop attacking people who are there to be public servants, and ensure that whether they agree with you or not, that you're going to get to cast your ballot.
And I can tell from your passion there that our election workers have been harassed and are feeling those threats very personally. And we did have another question about observers, because we know that political parties are trying to get advantage, and there'll be Democratic and Republican observers in each of the polling sites, and they have a little bit more leeway. And so one of the questions is, what can observers do and what can they not do that voters should be watching out for? And I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll start with it.
Okay.
The way the state law has changed in terms of articulating this aspect of our elections. What I've noticed between the previous issue of the election law and rules 2018 edition to the 2024 is that there is much more specificity about behavior. And the way the prohibited behavior is articulated it has to do with things like observers not being allowed to photograph or videotape, otherwise record the image of a voter's marked ballot, impede the access of any voter to the voting place. I mean, most of this is so common sense to have a peaceful vote in a peaceful precinct. Inhibit or interfere with any election official in the performance of their duty, including interfering with the transport of sealed ballot boxes, election equipment, and so on. Engage in electioneering, make or receive phone calls while in the voting place, interfere with the privacy of the voter, or interfere with the conduct of the election. Now, when it gets to allowable behavior, the way the law expresses it is it says that the observer will not be prohibited from doing any of the following things, and things like taking notes, you know, things that actually don't get in the way of anything. They don't hurt any aspect of the election. And so I find that you know, they can take photographs of the voting place before and after, but they can't do it when voters are in the enclosure and going through the voting process. So there's that. You know, there are aspects of it that are, again, very common sense driven and really easy to understand in law. But the difference between our earlier law and the statute now is that there is much more specificity to the behavior of the observers. So anyway, that's my start on that.
Thank you, Skip.
Just,
Go ahead, David.
I was just going to make one quick follow-up. Since, you know, we are so used to carrying a camera around there everywhere we go, all the
Yes.
time, everywhere, that sometimes people don't quite understand, well, why can't I take pictures when I'm voting or this, that, and the other? And one reason is because other people may not want to take have their picture taken. There's a privacy issue. But the other thing is that the reason that you're prohibited from taking a photograph of your marked ballot or voted ballot is to prevent ballot fraud, where you get paid to vote a certain way. How are you going to prove it? Well, I'm going to take a picture. That was the whole point of having a or one of the points of having a prohibition against that, is so that you can't have a vote buying scheme, because there's no way to prove how you voted. And that it's a very good reason when you think about it. But maybe if you haven't ever thought about it, you might wonder why you can't take a picture of your ballot. In addition to be cutting down on the possibility of being intimidated. Well, I'll do this to you, or I'll fire you, or whatever, if you don't vote a certain way, and you need to prove it to me this way. That takes the air out of that, out of that sale.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. And if people see someone they think that is being intimidated or getting in the way, who should they tell in that polling location? Which of the workers there?
You know,
The chief judge.
Yeah, chief judge always.
And that chief judge has, at least in our county, has essentially law enforcement on speed dial if needed.
And I think the chief judge has the legal authority to have a person who's harassing or intimidating to be removed from the site. But the way I understand the law, if they're inside the voting enclosure and they haven't voted, and law enforcement comes to scoop them up, they still have to be allowed to vote as long as they're inside the building. Now, I don't know how tenuous that could be, but again, that's kind of like a doff of the hat to North Carolina law and the spirit of the law that wants our voters to be able to vote, almost no matter what, and that's okay. It's just, but the chief judge is the one on the site, very, very important person, and to let them know.
Karen, I was smiling too, thinking somebody said, "Oh yeah, I just lifted this guy's wallet, but can I vote first?"
Well,
that arrest me.
I can tell the story of how that came to be. I mean, that has existed, and we do not have law enforcement officers stationed at our voting sites because that can be intimidating as well for some people. But yes, the chief judge at our voting sites has the authority to call in law enforcement to help with, to deal with a disruption or to help in peacekeeping matters. Now, you may see law enforcement or an auxiliary group of law enforcement helping with traffic control or something like that at certain sites. But being posted there is not permitted by North Carolina law. But it is a crime if you intimidate a voter or a worker, that is prosecutable. But the situation that probably prompted us to give that guidance was actually my very first election. There was someone who was campaigning who happened to be a bail bondsman, and he recognized someone going in to vote who had a warrant out for their arrest. And so he called law enforcement to say the person was present, and he had gone into the voting place. He willingly left without casting his ballot, but he was given the opportunity to cast his ballot because he was not a convicted felon. And so it was an interesting conversation between me and law enforcement officers of, you can't keep my voter from voting. You can do your part after they have had the opportunity. And they complied. We have a great working relationship with law enforcement, obviously with the difficult environment that we work in now. We've gone through a lot of efforts to partner with the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, the North Carolina Chiefs of Police Association. We now have a class that they can take on election law with the North Carolina Justice Academy for law enforcement officials. We have a guide that's put out, because the reality is they have to remember a lot of laws that have to be enforced. But when it comes down to election time, we want to make sure that they know how election law and other laws interact with each other, and that we can have a peaceful, wonderful voting experience for people.
Absolutely. So, it's interesting. In 2022, we did the town halls. Everybody was worried about the computers. Everybody was worried about computers being connected to the internet and getting hacked and all that. And they're not connected to the internet. But Tor, I want to just ask you a couple of quick questions about security. And one is, we know that Russians and the Chinese and other countries are trying to mess with us. We know that. We've heard that from federal sources. So what should people be on the lookout for with bad information, like this polling site's closed or whatever? How can people kind of look, and detect something like that? And then second question would be, if they do hack into, say, the State Board of Elections website, does that affect the vote count?
Yeah, thank you. Both really, really good questions. So I think the first one goes back to the mis and disinformation piece of it, and where are you getting the actual valid information from. So as has been stated, going to the State Board of Elections website, the County Board of Elections website, that is ultimately the two best resources to go to. Don't the official channels that are being used to provide information about the election are the ones that should be listened to. You need to validate those. There is so much mis and disinformation going on in the world that just because you see somebody post something on X or on Facebook or on TikTok or some other social media platform doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You need to go and validate that, especially if it seems controversial, if it seems like it's something that is created specifically to make you emotional. There's a really, really good chance that somebody has an agenda on that they're trying to get you to be emotional about it, and not go through and do that validation, do that check on it. I see it even with friends and family on my own social media, day in and day out. They're literally fighting against one another at an emotional level, because they've been manipulated into not going and seeking out the facts, just listening to these crafted sound bites that escalate the situation versus de-escalate it, and provide people the valid places to go with the real information that provide that. And so I would say that's very, very important. When it comes to that foreign influence, that's really probably the biggest risk that we see there is are they going to go out and expend resources to break into election systems at a computer level? Unlikely, because if you look at the discord that we have with simply what's being fed into the ecosystem of social media around dis and misinformation, it's having a very profound impact, and on both sides of the aisle, and that's very concerning. In general, it's certainly not helping. So getting to source of truth is really important. Now, when it comes to the technology piece of it, and we're talking Board of Elections website on election day, I think this goes back to something that Karen mentioned earlier in terms of when is the vote certified. When those results are getting reported on election night, those results are getting out there as quickly as they can possibly be gotten out there, so people have an idea of what is going on with the election. That is not to mean those results are the votes, the ballots, the certified what the election outcome is. When the county boards go to certify and the state board goes to certify, that's when things are official. So that election night reporting page is meant to aggregate that data and provide folks with a really good idea, a non-certified good idea of where the election has gone. But for instance, in the event that that website for some reason goes down, and we've had that happen, not for cyber attack reasons, but literally for traffic reasons. You have to remember it's millions of people clicking refresh all the time on this website because they want to see the next increment of that vote. And it's people, it's news outlets, it's people around the world who are interested in what's going on in this election for news purposes, for personal curiosity, whatever that happens to be. And that traffic has a really heavy load on the infrastructure. Board of Elections does a great job of ramping up that infrastructure leading up to elections to try and account for all of that. That doesn't mean it's not a lot of traffic and a lot of activity. It's still there. So it's a lot for us to look at on leading up to and on election day as well. So I think that's an important aspect of it, is that when in the event that there's an issue with that website, it doesn't necessarily mean that ballots have been compromised, that votes are not being counted, or that there's something nefarious going on when certain amounts of results come in all at once. This could be a county providing that information in a given order where it impacts that count structure. I know there's been issues in the past where it's like, oh, all of a sudden at XYZ time, we saw a massive increase in this candidate or that candidate. That's all happenstance. It's because of the way the results are loaded in, the way that it ends up getting processed. You can have a situation where maybe the processing of those numbers takes a minute to happen, and that website doesn't update for a minute because it's processing all the data that just got loaded into it. And I think those are things to take into account, is instead of looking for the nefarious reason that something happened, well, what are some simple logical explanations why something like that might happen? And in a lot of cases, we're looking at the system is just taking a moment to process, or it's an order of operations in terms of when things were coming in, things of that sort. There's logical explanations for each of these impacts that we've seen historically and likely going forward too. And if I can for a second, because there was a question that I noticed that came up around voting machines or ballot marking devices in particular. And I think this is maybe a good segue to kind of go into that for a second, if you're good with that.
Sure, go ahead.
So I guess to address that head on, can ballot marking devices be hacked? The answer is yes. If you look at the articles that have come out indicate that that's the case. If you look at the DEF CON security conference that's held annually out in Las Vegas, they have something called the Voting Village. That's a part of that, which it's several days where people are doing just that. They're going in and they're doing security testing, and in a lot of cases, figuring out how to break that technology. And that doesn't mean the technology shouldn't be used, and it doesn't mean there's not controls, and it doesn't mean they're not safe to vote on. And that's what I wanted to hit on and address, is that if you look at the DEF CON Voting Village and what takes place there, and this is the first part of it, in most cases, like if you go and look at pictures of it, those machines are literally taken apart. They're in pieces, sometimes with chips ripped off the board. They're not functional pieces of equipment when people get done with them in a lot of different cases. And if you take a moment to just step back and think about that, so picture yourself on election day and the precinct officials are there. Are they really going to stand around and just let somebody literally peel open a voting machine before their very eyes and not call somebody and say there's a problem here and we have a serious situation to deal with? That's really unlikely that that's going to happen. So even if you look at these situations where security experts or someone has gone through the effort to basically show that there's a vulnerability in those voting systems, if you look at the complexity that exists with how to actually exploit those systems, it's often not simple. It is complex. It takes time. It takes physical access. It, in a lot of cases, takes specialized equipment to actually do these types of things, all of which shouldn't be happening on election day. So I think, Jennifer, that goes back to a question around, what happens if somebody does see something weird? Well, they should report it into precinct officials, make sure that that's known, that something weird was going on there. They can then go and look at those machines. They can validate that the tamper seals are still in place, that somebody hasn't actually opened it. All the machines are sealed, and they're validated to be sealed both before and after. And there's the testing that goes on before and after in order to validate that the machines are working properly through this whole course of everything. They're also not connected to the internet, so that's another really important foundation. So that takes that largely away. The another really important part is if somebody was going to manipulate something in this, at least in North Carolina, the ballots are all coded all the way down to the precinct. You may have a different referendum in one place than you do another, which means that ballot had to be created for that, right? So there's differences there. So even if somebody was trying to manipulate something there, they would have to know that entire chain to even have a chance to do that one thing. And then they would somehow have to get around all these checks and balances, all this logic and accuracy testing, all of these physical tampering things and all these different checks in order to somehow successfully pull off even a single manipulation, not to mention doing this at scale, to where if they're going to affect an outcome of an election, they would have to somehow do it at scale. And I think that goes back to the hand-eye count and the accuracy discussion around that, where if you look statistically, hand-eye count is actually more challenging than it is to do the tabulator-based counts, because it introduces potential human error to that formula. It's kind of like telling a bank that they need to go through their entire vault and have their bank employees count every single bill that's in the bank vault, versus using the bill counter that we all see them use whenever you hand them a stack of cash. They trust the bill counter to count the bills accurately because they have a very, very, very minuscule error rate. And that would be the same thing with the tabulator equipment. So
That's
I'll pause
a
there. That was a whole lot.
great comparison there, Tori. That's a great comparison. And thanks for that update. I mean, every time I hear you explain our system and all the checks and balances and the way machines work, I'm even more confident that we're not getting hacked, and we're going to have a great, safe, and secure election season. One of the things I always tell people is to be patient, because the results are not final on election night. They're not final even maybe 10 days later. They're not final until all the challenges are met and everything is certified and sent to from the state. And the federal election, there's another step there as well. So just telling folks to be patient and to let the election workers do their jobs. Absolutely. Believe it or not, we are at the end of our time, and you guys have all been terrific. We are so fortunate to have the system we have in North Carolina. Do you know that in North Dakota, you don't even have to register to be able to vote? I don't know how they do it. But there are states that don't have early voting. There's a lot of difference. But North Carolina has a great system, and thank you all for supporting it so well. We are going to see if has Bob been able to join us, Aaron? Has Bob or ever been able to come on? I don't think he has. We know that Bob was coming back from Western North Carolina, having been there to help out with the recovery efforts. We also know, Kelly, that you're in Western North Carolina. I just want to check in, make sure you're doing okay before I sign us off and end up on our final slide with resources. Kelly, everything okay?
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. I live in Jackson County, which was largely spared. Of course, we have a few places, but just our hearts are always with those in our surrounding areas, and we're doing a lot here in Jackson County to try to help our areas, but I'm just so impressed with the goodness of people, the helpfulness of people that extends from elections to everything throughout what's been going on here in Western North Carolina. And I have a lot of faith in our neighbors right now, and I'm very impressed.
Good. We're glad that you're safe and we're all looking out for each other. Once again, Karen Brinson Bell, our election director for the state of North Carolina. Thank you so much. You are gracious. You just, yeah, you make me so confident in everything that we do.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I know we're trying to wrap up, but if I could just encourage everyone to plan their vote, go to ncsbe.gov, use the voter search tool to make sure your registration is accurate, to also see your sample ballot and to learn where your election day voting site is, if that's how you choose to vote, or to make your absentee request if you'd like to vote by mail. Or you can also use ncsbe.gov for the early voting location lookup tool, and find out where those early voting location sites and hours and so forth are in your county.
Super. Thank you so much, Karen. And David Hood and Catawba, Skip Saunders and Dare County. Thanks for representing a couple other counties tonight. Thanks for all the work that you do. Any last comments for your voters? Oh, wow.
David, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just try to be more confident than some people want you to be about our election system. If you've watched this out for the last hour and a half and don't feel more confident, then I'm afraid you weren't paying attention. This is a really good system that we have here. I'm proud of it. I know Karen said that the other states are also really good systems. Fine, but I'm sure we're better.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Yes. I'd like to thank you for letting me be a part of this. I really enjoyed your company tonight, and I learned a lot. And I wish all the voters in our state and in my beloved county, Dare County, the best wishes in this election. We'll be fine.
Super. And Tori is the nerd we need. So thanks for your time tonight. Tori's actually in Charlotte, but works for the whole state. And we appreciate your time so much. Please, we're going to put some resources up on our last slide here. Please do visit the government's website, ncsb.gov, for the most accurate, up-to-date information. Thanks to all those who are helping make sure that information is up to date. This has been recorded. We will put that on YouTube, and we will share that link. So for those of you who have friends who weren't able to watch, please share this and help people know how fair, safe, and secure elections are in North Carolina. I'm sorry that we missed my co-lead for North Carolina, Bob Orr, former North Carolina Supreme Court Justice, but he's been working on this as well, and we hope that he's traveling safe from Western North Carolina. Everybody have a great night and a terrific experience voting in North Carolina in 2024. Thanks so much to the Reimagining America Project for hosting us tonight, for the Legal Women Voters, Veterans for All Voters, for your assistance as well, and everything you do to educate voters. Good night, everybody.